Clara Reeves was forced to marry a ranch hand to save her sick daughter from being taken by the state, only to learn he'd sold himself into secret servitude to pay for the treatment. The man who held his contract, Vaylor, was a ruthless cattle baron known for treating people like property, including his own family. But when he showed up demanding Clara hand over her daughter to settle the debt, she made a move no one saw coming. And just wait until you hear how this quiet mother turned the entire power dynamic upside down, and why justice in the end didn't knock. It stormed in. When the doctors in Billings finally gave Clara Reeves the diagnosis, it felt like the sky cracked open and dropped every bolt of lightning on her shoulders at once. Her daughter, Abby, just 8 years old, and barely tall enough to reach the barn latch, had cancer. A rare, aggressive form. Treatable, yes. But the treatment came with a cost, more than the value of Clara's entire ranch, every steer in the corral, every piece of equipment, every acre her late husband once plowed by hand. And there was no husband now. James had died 3 winters ago, bucked off a horse while breaking a wild mare. The fall didn't kill him. The isolation and hours of unconscious bleeding did. Since that morning, Clara had clung to life with a stubbornness only the desperate can understand. She ran the land alone, sold what she could, planted and harvested, with aching joints and blistered palms. Not for wealth, not for pride, just to keep Abby warm and the wolves, both real and legal, off their porch. But the wolves came anyway. The county sent a letter stamped with urgency. If Clara couldn't prove financial stability and secure medical care for Abby within 30 days, the girl would be taken. Not by force, but by law. They called it protective placement. The newspapers called it the Orphan train, a long, slow-moving solution where children were sent east or west to strangers, to couples who needed help in the fields, to households that might feed them, but might not love them. And so, in the blue-lit silence of a sleepless night, Clara lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling above the kitchen. Her thoughts spun in circles. Sell the land? Beg the bank again? She'd tried everything. Every door was already shut. Until one creaked open, literally. In the doorway of her barn, backlit by lantern light, stood Weston Bailey, rough-spoken, hard-eyed, a former ranch hand who'd once ridden under her husband's command. Clara hadn't seen him since James's funeral. He looked older now, weather-worn, wiser, maybe. He took off his hat and held it like a man standing in church, his voice low but steady. "I heard about Abby," he said, not dancing around it. "I know things are bad, and I know you'd never accept help. Not as a woman, but as a mother?" He paused. "I want to marry you, Clara. I just sold my uncle's land up in Helena. There's money now, enough for Abby's treatment, enough to keep her off that train." Clara blinked. The offer felt like a rope thrown into a storm. She hated the idea of depending on anyone. She hated needing saving. But she loved her daughter more. She whispered yes. They married that same week, quietly, in the back of the general store, where the preacher kept his records. No cake, no guests, just a ring and a piece of paper that meant the difference between hope and despair. 2 days later, Abby was admitted to St. Joseph's Children's Hospital in Billings. The doctors called the timing a miracle. Clara called it mercy. But just when things began to feel like they might finally be turning, she uncovered the truth, and it changed everything. Weston had never been a man of many words. He wore silence, like a second skin, thick, worn, familiar. So when he finally spoke on the third night after Clara and Abby moved into his modest homestead, she didn't expect it, and she certainly didn't expect what followed. They sat by the wood stove, embers glowing low, the scent of cedar filling the air. Abby was asleep in the next room, her breathing light and peaceful for the first time in weeks. Clara was knitting by habit, though her hands barely moved. That's when he looked up from his chair, voice raspy from disuse. "I lied," he said quietly. She didn't react at first, just looked at him, waiting for more. He kept his eyes on the floor. "About the land. About selling it. I knew it wouldn't move fast enough. No one's buying right now, and if they are, they're lowballing. I knew you wouldn't make the deadline." Clara's fingers stopped mid-loop. Her heart beat faster. She knew this tone. It wasn't regret. It was the weight of something unfinished. "So, I went to Vaylor." The name hit her like the snap of a whip. Vaylor, the wealthiest cattleman in 3 counties, known for his cruelty as much as his money. A man who once sent his own teenage son to labor camps for losing a game of poker. "What did you give him?" she asked, her voice low, already bracing. Weston looked up, and for a moment, he didn't look like the steady cowboy who had stepped in to save her. He looked like a man who had crossed a line and couldn't come back. "I didn't have cattle, didn't have land, so I gave him me," he said simply. "A year, no wages, no weapons, no rights, just labor, no leaving, no saying no." The words hung in the air like the final notes of a funeral hymn. Clara blinked, as if trying to make the room stop spinning. "Why?" she whispered. "Because Abby deserved a chance. And you deserved peace." His voice cracked, just slightly, but it said more than any shout ever could. Clara stood, but her legs trembled. The floor under her felt foreign, unstable. He hadn't just offered her help. He had offered himself to a man no one dared cross. And now there was a catch. "If I break the agreement," Weston added, voice quieter now, "Vaylor comes for you. Or her. That was the condition." It was no longer just a sacrifice. It was a trap, one he had walked into with his eyes open, for them. And now Clara wasn't just a grateful mother or a weary bride. She was collateral in a deal she never agreed to. A week after Abby began responding to treatment, her cheeks rosier, her laughter returning like sunlight after a long storm, a carriage rolled up the path to Clara's front porch. Black wheels, black trim, black heart behind the reins. It was Vaylor. He stepped down, every inch of him dressed like the landowner he believed himself to be. Clean gloves, polished boots, cold smile. He didn't wait for an invitation. "Your cowboy turned out to be softer than I thought," he said, casually dusting off his coat. "Ran off. Couldn't handle the agreement." He looked Clara over as if taking her measure again, as if she were one of his cattle up for barter. "But I'm not unreasonable," he added, voice slick as oil. "You want out? Fine. Give me the girl." Clara's breath caught. "There's a couple in St. Louis," Vaylor went on. "Wealthy, proper, no children of their own. She'll live better than either of you could provide. And in exchange, you get your freedom. Paperwork, clean slate, silence." The world seemed to stop. Inside the house, Abby was giggling with the nurse, her hands wrapped around a rag doll someone had given her at the hospital. Her curls bounced as she turned toward the window. Her eyes, still bright, still fighting, met Clara's for just a second. And in that instant, Clara understood. What Vaylor offered wasn't freedom. It was surrender. That night, under a moon veiled by pine branches, Clara led Abby into the woods, deep into the timberlands where her late husband once hunted elk and found peace. They reached a small cabin, forgotten by most, but not by Clara. There, by lantern light, she took a pencil and wrote a letter. Not to a friend, not to a relative, but to the district attorney. She wrote everything, the arrangement, the deal Weston made, his disappearance, Vaylor's ultimatum. She wrote it not as a plea, but as a statement. And at the bottom, she signed her name with a hand that no longer trembled. By dawn, she stood beside the sheriff as Vaylor's carriage approached the town square. Deputies flanked both sides. No fanfare, no noise, just accountability waiting at the end of a long trail of silence. Clara stepped forward. "This wasn't a contract," she said, voice steady. "This was servitude. This was coercion. This was a trap." Vaylor's smirk faltered for the first time. 2 days later, Weston was found in a mining camp, exhausted, bruised, but alive. When Clara arrived, he could barely believe what he saw. "You risked everything," he whispered. Clara didn't flinch. "I did what I had to," she said, "as a mother and as your wife." There was no triumph in her voice, only truth. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: relief. Not because the danger was over, but because she had chosen what was right, not easy. And because what began as a sacrifice was now something else entirely. Not obligation, not survival, but love, earned, endured, and real.